My grandparents had 80 acres of land, roughly 20 miles east of Snowflake. The locals in Snowflake just call this area out east. My grandparents' mobile home sat high up on a gently rising hill. About a mile south, at the bottom of that same hill, my aunt and uncle had built a 3-level house where they lived with their 2 sons and 2 daughters. It was a really clever design. From the front, it looked like just 2 stories, but because of the hill's slope, the basement was visible from the back. A huge wooden deck wrapped around the middle part of the house. Their home faced west, and to the east, the hill slowly dropped into a wash. From the back deck, you could see the Zuni Holy Mountain and the Little Colorado River Valley, close to St. John's, Arizona. This whole tale is about the truly terrifying experience my older cousin, Sam, went through back in the summer of 1991. It was late June, and Sam was 17. Most kids his age would be soaking up their summer break, but Sam? Not so much. He'd gone to some massive graduation party and gotten completely wasted. Bad luck for him, the sheriff's department decided to crash the party too, and he ended up with an underage drinking ticket. That meant probation, a serious lecture from his folks, and a summer grounding. His mom even took the keys to his pickup truck, which he'd worked all the previous summer to buy. So he was stuck right in the middle of nowhere. He had been keeping pretty busy, though, helping out our grandparents up on the hill. One late afternoon, after coming home, Sam saw their neighbor, Jeff, from about 5 miles to the west, had stopped by to chat with his dad, Bill. Jeff was one of those real hippie types. He was cool and all, but everyone kind of suspected he probably indulged in a bit too much LSD back in the 70s. Jeff's place was on top of the bluff, right next to Stoddard's house. Bill and Jeff were just shooting the breeze on the porch when Sam walked up. Sam said hello to Jeff, and Jeff then asked if Sam would be interested in helping him with a project on his property. He mentioned he'd pay Sam a couple $100 for a week or 2 of work, and Sam agreed. Some extra party money, especially since his parents were leaving the next week for their trip to Nebraska with our grandparents. The next morning, Bill handed Sam his keys back so he could drive over to Jeff's place. When he got there, Jeff was already loading shovels and other gear into his truck. Sam hadn't actually asked what they'd be doing, but seeing the shovels, he figured they were probably just replacing fence posts. Jeff told him to hop in the truck, and they headed north along the top of the bluff on a barely visible 2-track dirt road. The view from the bluff top was amazing. You could see for miles. To the west, you could spot the edges of Snowflake and the big dry wash, dotted with cottonwood trees. The white mountains dominated the horizon to the south. Northward, mesas near Holbrook were visible. And to the east, along a smaller wash, you could just make out the roof of Stoddard's house. The thought of Stoddard's house sent a shiver down his spine and gave him goosebumps. He tried to push all the stories about what had happened there to the back of his mind. They rounded a small sandstone curve, and Jeff stopped the truck. In front of them was a large ruin. Sam had grown up out east and had seen many Anasazi ruins, but this one was different. It looked like a big pile of loose sandstone, but a closer look revealed pottery shards everywhere. Like most ruins, this one had big holes where someone had used a backhoe to dig for pots at some point. Sam got a really uneasy feeling. Jeff must have noticed his expression because Sam said Jeff started explaining that his big project was to excavate the ruin. He had this grand plan. He was going to dig it all out and then open a museum right there on his property with whatever items they found. He'd charge people about $5 to come and check it out. Sam argued, asking if digging in ruins wasn't illegal. Jeff just told him, "Not if you own the property, son." Sam felt even more uncomfortable. "What about angering spirits?" he asked. Jeff just laughed at that. "Are you talking about Stoddard's place?" he asked. Sam just nodded. "Don't get me wrong, Sam, your aunt and grandma are nice, honest people, but I don't think it was Indian spirits. I think they just heard rumors in town about what happened to Stoddard and freaked themselves out. Besides," he added, "this isn't a burial site. There are no bodies here." Sam says now that he really should have listened to that feeling telling him to leave, but he just brushed it off and started shoveling. Around noon, Jeff headed back to his house to make lunch for them. Sam stayed at the ruin. He said he didn't really think much about it at the time, but he noticed how incredibly silent it was around the ruin. There were no signs or sounds of birds, not even cicadas, which usually, around that time of year, never shut up. He swore he could hear faint voices on the wind, but he just chalked it up to being spooked because Stoddard's place was only about a mile away. When Jeff came back with their sandwiches, he also brought a camera so they could document their progress and get photos for the museum. Jeff had Sam take pictures of him in the room they'd cleared out and with the artifacts they'd found. So they worked for a week. They weren't making a ton of progress. They hadn't found much, just a small pot, some beads, and half of a tammy. Sam was happy when he finally got a day off. All week long, he'd been fighting this feeling that something bad was going to happen. He was just glad to get away from those ruins for a while. He also hadn't been sleeping well. One night, he dreamt his bed was shaking. After a pretty uneventful weekend, Sam returned to Jeff's house Monday morning. To his surprise, there was a backhoe parked in the driveway. Another neighbor had loaned it to Jeff. Jeff was thrilled because now they could really speed things up. And they did make a lot of progress. They uncovered 3 to 4 more rooms and found some more artifacts. Tuesday and Wednesday went by the same way. More rooms, more artifacts, all while snapping pictures. After filling 4 rolls of film, Jeff took them to town to be developed. This was way before camera phones and digital cameras, where it usually took about 10 days to get your pictures back. It was now Thursday. They had come across a pretty large room in the pueblo. In the middle of it was a big block of sandstone. This really piqued Jeff's curiosity because all the other sandstone they'd found had been small. Using the backhoe, he moved the sandstone to the side. Beneath it was a black hole. Something about that black hole made Sam's stomach clench. Jeff, however, was incredibly excited. He peered into the hole, but couldn't make anything out. He grabbed a flashlight and shined it down. "It's another room," Jeff yelled. Sam really didn't want to look. Something about that opening made his skin crawl. Jeff told Sam to run and grab a ladder. Sam did as he was told, secretly hoping Jeff wouldn't ask him to go down there. Thunder rumbled in the distance as he headed back to the ruin. Monsoon clouds were gathering in the south, and the wind had started to pick up. Jeff set the ladder down into the opening. Sam asked if it was safe, and Jeff figured that since the room had been filled with dirt and that giant slab of sandstone for 1,000 years, he didn't think the roof would just collapse now. Jeff went down the ladder with his flashlight. "Holy shit," Sam heard Jeff exclaim. Jeff called up to Sam, who slowly made his way over. "Bring the camera and come down." Terror seized Sam. He really didn't want to go down there, but he also didn't want Jeff to think he was a coward. He grabbed the camera and descended into the dark pit. At first, he couldn't see anything. It was just black, incredibly black. Then he spotted the beam of Jeff's flashlight shining on a large, corrugated pot. Even with the sunlight streaming through the opening, it couldn't cut through the oppressive darkness. Finally, it dawned on Sam that the walls and floors were entirely black. The air was stale, and it reeked of something S-like. Jeff was excitedly moving around a room, taking in all the supposed treasures. A long roll of thunder boomed in the distance. "Start taking pictures," Jeff exclaimed, annoyed that Sam was just standing there. "Make sure the flash is on." Sam began to snap photos. The flash illuminated the room for brief moments, and after about the 3rd photo, Sam caught a glimpse of something that made him jump. A human skull. With his heart pounding in his chest, he squeaked out, "Jeff, there's a skull." Jeff, still busy looking around, didn't hear him. Sam snapped another photo just to be sure. Yep, definitely a skull. But Jeff still didn't hear him. So Sam said louder, "Jeff, there's a skull." "What?" "Oh yeah, a skull." "There's a few of them down here," Jeff replied casually. "Looks like there was a fire in this room." He then kicked one of the skulls across the room towards Sam, who jumped back. "What the hell, man?" Sam said, his fear quickly turning into anger. "Dude, this isn't right. You shouldn't be messing with bodies. We need to call the cops or something." Jeff just laughed. "Call the cops and tell them what?" "That we found a bunch of 1,000-year-old dead Indians." Sam was absolutely furious now. "Listen, Jeff, if you want to mess around with this stuff, be my guest. I'm done. There's something bad about this place, and I'm leaving." Jeff laughed again. "You're scared of a bunch of bones? Whatever, man. Go. I'm not paying your ass to be a crybaby." Sam threw Jeff's camera to the ground and scrambled up the ladder. Jeff immediately started cursing about his broken camera. Sam didn't care, though. He started walking back to Jeff's house where his truck was parked. The wind was blowing really hard now. Black clouds covered the sun, and Sam could see flashes of lightning along with the thunder. When he reached his house, he remembered that his aunt and uncle had left for their trip to Nebraska, taking his sisters with them. His older brother, Zach, was also gone, working his evening shift at Pizza Hut. Sam was exhausted. He lay down on the couch and fell asleep, trying not to think about the black room full of bones. A loud crack of thunder shook the entire house and jolted Sam awake. The house was pitch dark. He fumbled his way to the light switch and flipped it on. Nothing. A flash of lightning lit up the room. "Damn, the storm must have knocked out the power," he muttered. The wind was howling fiercely outside. He fumbled around in the closet until he found the lantern and lit it. He still felt incredibly creeped out, so he went up to his bedroom where he had a joint stashed. He figured if he smoked it, it would help calm his nerves. His bedroom window faced the driveway. He opened it up and went to light the joint. A flash of lightning, and something darted across the driveway. His heart skipped a beat. The dog started barking frantically. He quickly put down the joint and slammed the window shut. Terror gnawed at his gut. What the hell was that? He went downstairs as a precaution and locked the front sliding door. Now he heard heavy footsteps running across the porch. He went into full-on panic mode. "Shit, the side door," he thought. He bolted across the living room and tripped over a chair. The dogs were going wild, growling and barking. He caught a glimpse of something running past the living room window, illuminated by another flash of lightning. He got to the side door, fumbling at the lock. Whatever was outside already had a hold of the doorknob, and it started to turn. He slammed the deadbolt locked. Shit, the basement sliding glass door. He bolted down the stairs. He made it to the door, finding it already locked. "Phew," he breathed. Another lightning bolt, and in its flash, he saw the silhouette of what he thought was a man, covered with fur, with a coyote skin draped over his head, red eyes shining from the darkness where his face should be. It was standing at the edge of the yard, incredibly tall. Staring into those red, shining eyes, his breath caught in his throat. Panic surged through him. Scrambling, he fell backward, hitting his head on a table. Crying, he got to his feet and bolted upstairs to the phone. "Call 911. Call 911. His heart hammered in his brain. He picked up the phone. Nothing. A loud thud from the roof shook him out of his despair. The thing is on the roof. Shit, gun gone. That thought instantly came to mind. He bolted to his parents' bedroom, where they kept a shotgun in the closet. The dogs bounded in after him. It began to pour rain. He could still hear the footsteps on the roof. He locked the door behind him and went into the closet, the dogs following. He found the shotgun, his hand shaking like crazy, and loaded it. The dogs were quiet now. He couldn't hear anything from the roof anymore. Where the hell is it? In the house, he wondered. He sat in the closet and waited, the dogs huddled around him. What felt like an hour passed, and nothing but the distant boom of thunder as the storm moved on. He started to calm down a bit, in shock at this point. The storm had rolled north. Suddenly, he heard the door rattling. Bang, bang. It was beating on the door. Boom. The shotgun went off, blowing a hole in the closet ceiling, and then he heard someone screaming, "Don't shoot." He heard his brother Zach scream. Tears ran down Sam's face. He dropped the gun and ran to the door, unlocking it, almost knocking over his brother. Zach was furious. "What the hell, man? Why are you shooting at me?" Sam was in a daze. The whole story of what had happened earlier that day and evening spilled out of him. Zach listened without saying a word. At the end, Zach asked him, "Okay, Sam, what did you smoke?" "Nothing. I'm not high, bro." Zach just laughed at him. "Okay, but Mom's gonna be pissed. Not only because you blew a huge hole in their closet, but also all the mud tracks all over the place. You better get it cleaned up." "What mud? And how did Zach get in?" "The house was locked," Sam asked. Zach told him that the sliding glass door was wide open. The electricity had come back on at some point while he was in the closet. True to what Zach said, there were red mud barefoot prints all around the house. Sam swore it wasn't him. He showed Zach his shoes and bare feet and pointed out that the prints were much larger than his feet. Zach agreed. "I bet it was Jeff," Zach concluded. "He probably came over to mess with you because he's pissed you quit and busted his camera. He knew you were freaked out, so he thought he'd mess with you." Sam wasn't entirely sure, but it made him feel slightly better. "Yeah," he told himself, "Jeff, that asshole." He thought, "I must not have got the latch to the sliding door closed. The noise on the roof must have been the wind blowing shingles off the roof." It began to all make sense. He and Zach drank a couple of beers their dad had left in the fridge. They cleaned the mud as best they could, and after getting a little buzzed, they decided they were going to go over in the morning and confront Jeff. Zach said Jeff needed to pay Sam extra, since they now had to rent a carpet shampooer to clean up the mess Jeff made. Finally, they decided to go into town, as one of their friends was throwing a party. Sam didn't think either of them wanted to stay out there. The party was one of those out in the boonies with a big bonfire. There were about 20 teens there. Sam was having a hard time enjoying the party. He kept feeling like something was watching him. The beer wasn't tasting good, and he wasn't really socializing with his friends. They asked him what was wrong, but he just said he was tired. The full moon was rising to the east, casting its eerie light on the sandstone bluffs and cedars. Sam gazed past the firelight and caught a glimpse of something moving just out of reach of the light. Must be someone peeing, he thought to himself, but his gut was disagreeing. Suddenly, a strange, throaty howl pierced the night. Sam jumped. He looked around, but no one else seemed to have heard anything. They just continued laughing and talking. He now heard heavy footsteps right behind him. He turned to see a large figure of a man standing just outside the firelight. He was paralyzed with fear. The man's face was hidden in shadow, but Sam could feel its eyes piercing him. He closed his eyes and started whispering a prayer under his breath. When he finally had the courage to open his eyes, the man was gone. He was pretty freaked out at this point and just wanted to get out of there. He told Zach he was going home, but Zach decided to stay. Sam didn't really want to go home. He certainly didn't want to go back to the party. His mind racing, he headed down east onto the old Concho Highway. Surely, he thought to himself, I'm just freaking myself out. Jeff came over and scared me, and that person at the party was probably just someone who was out there peeing. Yeah, makes sense. He noticed something run across the highway. It was about 2 a.m., so the highway was deserted. He slowed down, thinking it must have been a deer. Crash. Something hit the back of his truck, jerking it forward. What the hell? He slammed on the brakes, looking in the rearview mirror. He caught a glimpse of shining eyes. He was in full panic mode. He stomped on the gas, sheer terror engulfing him. Too afraid to look back, he saw something out of the corner of his eye. He turned to look and saw a man running right next to his truck. He checked his speed, 70 miles an hour. He looked again, and now the coyote-type creature was looking at him. At first, its face was shrouded in blackness, and then he said it transformed before his eyes. The only way he could describe it was that of a demon, large red eyes and a twisted smile showing long, sharp teeth. It threw back its head and laughed. It took a long, clawed hand and scratched along the truck as it sped past, and then disappeared into the darkness. So, this is what I remember. We lived about 2 hours away from Snowflake. I was 7 years old in my bed when at 3 a.m., our family was woken up by someone pounding on the door. Of course, this woke up everyone, including us kids, as we watched my dad open the door to see my cousin Sam. He was white as a ghost, shaking and crying. My parents were startled, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. He started babbling about demons chasing him, and my mom sent us back to bed. The next day, my dad called another friend, and they took Sam somewhere in his Saunders to see a medicine man. After they returned, Sam stayed with us until his parents got back from Nebraska. When he finally went home, he never saw anything like it again. Years later, when I was older and we'd become closer, I asked him what happened that night, the one he'd shown up at our house. He reluctantly told me. I later asked my parents about it, and they confirmed the same story he had told them, minus one final part. The morning Sam showed up at our house, Zach and his older brother went to Jeff's house to collect Sam's money. When they got there, Jeff wasn't around. The door to the house was wide open, and the inside was trashed, furniture overturned and broken. Jeff ended up being gone for about 6 months. Everyone wondered where he had gone. No one really knew anything about his family, just that they were from the Midwest. At one point, my grandma even filed a missing persons report with the sheriff's office. But later, the sheriff informed her that Jeff was back east. When he finally did return, he was gaunt and looked like he'd aged about 20 years. Everyone wondered if it was the drugs. Fast forward 5 or 6 years. My grandparents invited Jeff to Thanksgiving at their home. Sam had graduated and long since moved away, but he was home for Thanksgiving. Jeff asked Sam to come out to his truck because he had something to show him. Sam agreed. Jeff handed him a stack of photos. They were the pictures they had taken while excavating the ruins. Sam flicked through them, not really wanting to think about what had happened back then. In the last few years, he convinced himself it was all just a bunch of coincidences, and he had simply freaked himself out over them. Jeff, looking unhappy, told Sam to look at the pictures more closely. Sam did, and at first, he didn't notice anything. But then he saw them. In the shadows of the pictures, there were figures, small, twisted, and evil, with the same face of the demon that had been chasing him. Jeff apologized to Sam, but he said he had to make sure he wasn't crazy. He told Sam that in the 6 months he was gone, he was hunted by this thing. It followed him all the way to Oklahoma. Finally, he sought the help of a medicine man. He returned the artifacts back to the ruin. Sam said he didn't know what happened to the photos, and he didn't want to know. This is an account of my first summer after finishing high school, when I was 23 years old. My 3 college freshman friends and I decided to live together. One of them was Earl, my best friend for many years, whose girlfriend's father owned the property. This land was a decent size, featuring several old cabins and a large main house nestled deep within the woods. I believe it might have once been a campground before the owner purchased it to live and operate his business from. Our home was situated right at the very front of the property, by the road, while the owner's house was at the far back, accessible only by a dirt track with ditches on either side. Just a minute's walk into the woods from our house with a small, furnished cabin with power. The 4 of us living in the main house were myself, Earl, John, and Chuck. We often had friends and girlfriends over, enjoying parties throughout the summer, both at our place and the owner's house even before we officially moved in. While much of this story comes from my friends' accounts, I trust them completely, having been close with them for a long time. Plus, I witnessed enough myself to know that everything they described aligns with my own experiences. Our initial strange encounter happened at the very start of summer, even before we settled into the house. It was evening and already dark as I slowly drove my car down the dirt lane towards the owner's residence when something white and quite large darted in front of my vehicle. It was a blur, moving too quickly to properly identify, but given our wooded surroundings, I assumed it was some kind of albino fox. I dismissed it and continued on to the house. A week later, we were all moved into the front house by the street, and things were going great. I must admit, even the front part of the property felt somewhat eerie, despite being the most open area with fewer trees. The owner's mother had lived and passed away in our house years ago, which added to the unsettling atmosphere. There was also an old Mother Mary statue in the woods that always felt a bit sketchy. Across the road was a small, independent tire shop with a dirt lot. The only item left in the house when we moved in was an old cheetah statue from the 1960s, a tall, slender, sitting figure that reached about my waist. We thought it was quirky and retro, so we put it in the hallway corner. For a few weeks, everything was normal. Some friends did experiment with a few substances like LSD and salvia a couple of times, in addition to regular drinking, but I don't believe this influenced what followed. We had parties, invited girls over, and played guitars in the cabin. It was a fantastic time. However, things gradually grew tense and took a turn for the worse. Many separate events occurred, but I believe they are all connected, even if they seemed random at the time. After a couple of fun-filled weeks, Earl began suffering from severe insomnia due to persistent tooth pain that he couldn't afford to get fixed. He was getting only about an hour of sleep each night and slowly became more irritable, though it wasn't overly serious yet. One evening, John, Earl, and another friend we'll call Don were out in the cabin. John, a strict teetotaler, was completely sober, though the others had been drinking lightly. Earl was playing his guitar and singing some of our original songs. This part of the story, before I became involved, was recounted by John. Our fourth roommate, Chuck, was already asleep in his bed, and I was in my room. Earl was playing his guitar when he remarked to Don, "Wow, man, those harmonies you're doing are great. Since when can you sing?" Don looked puzzled and told Earl he wasn't singing along. Earl started singing again, but stopped when he heard the harmonies a second time. He initially thought his ears were playing tricks, but John and Don had heard them too. They put the guitar down and decided to investigate. They walked through the clearing, momentarily startled by the Mother Mary statue in the woods, until they reached the road. Across the street, they saw the largest white cat they had ever encountered. It wasn't just a cat. It was the size of a large dog or a mountain lion. They fumbled with their phones, trying to record it. At that moment, I spotted them from my window and ran out to join them. As I reached the yard, I was as stunned as they were. There was this giant white bobcat perched on a hill across from the tire shop. It was massive, roughly the size of a German shepherd, but something was terribly wrong with its tail. It had a grotesque, fleshy, bare tail like a rat's. It was so long I couldn't see its entire length, but it was clearly disproportionate and much longer than a normal cat's tail. Don picked up a rock and threw it. I swear to you, all four of us, completely sober, watched this creature stand up on its hind legs and calmly stroll into the woods, dragging its tail behind it. We immediately bolted inside. Earl, more exhausted than usual, successfully drank himself to sleep. Don did the same. I don't recall how John and I managed to sleep that night. Every creak in the house terrified me. The next morning, we woke Chuck and gave him quite a fright. We were all on edge for the rest of the day, but with the sun out, we tried to resume our fun and push the incident to the back of our minds. Later that day, Earl confided in me about his severe lack of sleep and how this experience certainly wouldn't help. Night fell once more, and we all decided on a quiet evening after the previous night's excitement. That night, Chuck suffered his first and only night terror. He was awake in his bed but paralyzed, hearing the growls, snarls, and screams of a cougar-like creature or bobcat. A huge white mass dashed across his doorway. Slowly regaining movement, he came to my room to tell me what had happened. He didn't sleep for the remainder of the night. The next morning, we decided to move the cheetah statue from the hallway into the cabin. For the next few weeks, nothing major happened, though we remained uneasy. Earl's condition slipped a little further, but things were slowly improving. I decided to do some research into what we'd seen, looking into cryptozoology, demons, and monsters. I finally had a breakthrough when I found an article in an old book about Maine urban legends. The book described something called the ding-ball cougar, or plonus, which, in my opinion, just sounds better. The ding-ball was described as a cougar whose last tail joint was ball-shaped, bare of hair and flesh. It was said to have a fondness for human flesh and would sing with a human voice to lure unsuspecting people from their cabins at night, waiting in the dark to crack their skulls with its tail. My heart pounded as I read this. It matched our experience so well. While the article didn't mention it walking on its hind legs or being white, the similarities deeply shocked me. I kept this information to myself for a while. A few days later, Earl's insomnia reached a peak. Around 10 p.m., as I lay in bed, I heard a massive crash. From where I was, it sounded like someone had fallen down the stairs. I rushed into the hallway just as Earl emerged from his room, and I yelled, "What the hell was that?" Earl turned to me, raised his fist, and snapped, "Shut up, man," before running downstairs. I sat in my room for a minute, confused, and after about 20 minutes, I drove to my parents' house to spend the night, staying there the next day, too. That night, Earl called to apologize. The crash had come from his room, where he had angrily kicked a chair due to his tooth pain. When I came out, he thought I was yelling at him. We made up on the phone, and then he asked me a peculiar question. "Hey man, did you come home today at all?" I said no and asked why. He explained that he was the last one out, so he had to lock the doors, which we've been doing for about 2 weeks since we all got freaked out. Earl had the only key. "Okay," I said, and he sounded a little scared when he added, "The cheetah statue was on top of Chuck's bed." I had told him not to touch it. Later that night, when I returned to the house, Chuck's room was closed. We went inside to look, and there it was. The cheetah statue had been placed in the center of Chuck's bed, standing upright. Given his lumpy mattress, the fact that it stood so straight was impressive and completely unnatural. It wasn't leaning or tilted. As soon as I touched it, it toppled over. The next day, I took it and hid it in one of the older cabins used for storage, where no one would bother looking for it. But here's the kicker. The very next night, it was back in Chuck's room. The bed was neatly made, and the cheetah was tucked under the blankets with its head peeking out, as if it were taking a nap. We burned the statue the next day. I wish I could say that solved everything, but it didn't. Over the next few weeks, we continued to be stalked by white blurs in the corner of our vision. We heard rustling leaves and the occasional faint whisper of singing in the distance. At one point, the Mother Mary statue was even found turned backward, no longer facing our home. I'm not sure when it happened, but we only noticed it then. A few days passed, summer ended, and we all left. We still visit other parts of the property, but we avoid that particular house. We occasionally hear rustling, but we no longer look for color because we simply don't want to see the white blur anymore. After all this, I'm still not sure what the plonus is: a creature, a spirit, a demon, or all of the above. All I know is that Earl's tooth pain mysteriously disappeared, and Chuck has never had another night terror since. I know that whatever it was, it's still out there, and I remember how old and mysterious my state still is. This happened to me on October 27th this year. For context, I'm a 19-year-old guy, currently serving in the Finnish military, as it's mandatory for everyone over 18. In late October, my company had a pretty standard shooting camp. We go to a training area, practice shooting for a week, and then head back to the brigade. This camp was just like any other, except we assigned a few guards to the main roads leading to the area to make sure no unauthorized people entered the dangerous zone. Being a guardsman was actually a sweet gig. If you got chosen, you were placed in a booth that had heating, a bunk, electricity, a fridge, and all sorts of other luxuries that the rest of the troops could only dream of while lying in their tents. So on Friday evening, the 27th, I was over the moon when I found out I'd be taking the last guardsman shift at the booth. I was going to guard the place from the moment I arrived until the next morning when someone would pick me up and we'd all leave. I had a battle buddy with me for the booth so we could take turns, allowing one to sleep while the other stood guard. We arrived at the booth and it was already late evening. My buddy and I just dropped our gear, cranked up the heat in the booth, and decided on our shifts. My buddy was set to guard from 7 p.m. until 11 p.m., and then I'd take over from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m., and so on. I probably could have gone straight to sleep, but I decided to keep my buddy company since I wasn't feeling tired. We ended up just chatting for the whole 4 hours about life and random stuff. The usual things young guys talk about. The time honestly flew by, and no cars passed through the booth the entire time. Finally, my buddy's shift ended, and mine began. He said he was tired and immediately went to sleep, so I took my place as guardsman and continued alone. At this point, it's probably a good idea to tell you a bit about where we were. The shooting area itself was dozens of kilometers wide and quite remote, so civilians usually didn't bother coming, even by accident. The booth itself was about 5 kilometers from our main campsite, so my buddy and I were pretty much isolated from everyone and everything. The only way we could communicate was via a radio that we could use to contact the security major if anything happened. The area we had to guard was an X-shaped junction, with one road going north to south and the other west-east. Everything south of the booth was strictly off-limits to anyone who didn't have direct permission from the security major to enter, as it was dangerous due to the shooting and explosions we practiced there. Back to my shift. Those 4 hours I had to sit there in complete silence felt much longer than the 4 hours I'd spent chatting with my friend, obviously. But I didn't complain. I actually quite enjoyed it. I looked at the snow-covered roads and forests, dimly lit by one single street lamp and the crescent moon in the cloudless sky. It was literally a perfect night for ghost stories and monsters. There was no wind, no sound at all, and no cars passed during my entire shift. I loved it. I've always liked being alone and cherished silence. On top of that, I also enjoyed anything creepy, so I kept myself entertained imagining all sorts of scary beings lurking in the forest beyond the reach of the streetlight. Not that I actually believed any of it, though. But I had to admit that each time I stepped out of the booth, I got this feeling of being watched. The one that makes your neck tingle and the hairs stand up on the back of your neck. I didn't mind it, though. It was normal. I was a guardsman in the middle of nowhere, basically alone in the middle of the night. It was normal to be a little paranoid. Still, there would be nothing to fear in the forest. I lived my whole life near them and know really well what lies within them and what doesn't. That's how I kept my imagination from running too wild. Hours passed, and my shift was nearing its end. I looked at my phone and decided that soon it would be time to wake up my buddy. But before doing that, I decided to go out and take a piss. I didn't want to go to sleep and then wake up minutes later with the urge to pee. So that's what I did. I stepped out, walked behind the booth, and started doing my business. All was peaceful. I had already started planning what I was going to do on my next vacation when I happened to lift my gaze from the ground and took a quick glance at my surroundings. As soon as I looked to my left, directly to the south of the booth, my heart skipped a beat and my stomach grew cold. Just a mere 20 to 30 meters away from me, in the forest, barely lit by the street light, something was standing there. It clearly looked human, but the sheer size of the thing assured me that it was not. The thing had to be at least 3 meters tall. It wasn't strangely shaped in any way. It looked perfectly human, but it was just huge. From its appearance, it was wearing long, green, robe-like clothing, similar to a sniper's ghillie suit. Its face was pale, but I couldn't make out any facial features. It was too far away for that. But I could tell that it was staring straight at me, and I was standing absolutely still. I didn't move a muscle, nor did I make the slightest sound. That, in particular, still gives me the creeps. One curious detail I also noticed was that it was crossing its arms over its chest, so that its hands were clutching its shoulders. That's the best way I can describe what I saw. And usually, when I tell people this story, they dismiss it, but then I showed them the evidence. I took a photo of the creature I saw. I may have been scared out of my mind, but I was still a guardsman, and my duty was to document everything that happened. After I had recovered from my initial shock of seeing this thing, I just continued staring at it while silently finishing my pee. I pulled my pants up, closed them, and thought about what I would do next. The obvious answer was to pull out my rifle and confront it, but my careless self had decided to leave it in the booth, along with my battle knife and axe. I was without a weapon, face to face against this towering behemoth of a humanoid. I weighed my options and decided to get the hell out of there, but not before I took that picture. After I had done that, I slowly turned around and walked back to the booth. I sat in my chair, grabbed the axe, and waited. Now, you might ask why I didn't grab the assault rifle. The answer is because this isn't the USA. This is Finland. And even though we are in a military shooting camp, carrying ammo with you is prohibited, even for a guardsman. That's because here, average citizens can't just carry a loaded gun with them wherever they please. So having ammo with us, when the risk of running into a hostile armed person is really minimal, would just be another safety risk. Usually, just the sight of a gun, let alone an assault rifle, is enough to scare violent people into calming down. But what I had seen was no human. It couldn't have been. So now I just sat in my booth, holding my axe, ready to defend myself if the creature came. But it never did. The last couple of dozen minutes of my shift went absolutely silent. When my shift ended, I immediately woke up my buddy and told him what I'd seen. But apparently, he was so deep in sleep 2 days after he'd just woken up that he really didn't register what I had just told him. I, however, didn't care. The only thing I cared for was that I wouldn't set foot outside that booth again that night. And it was my turn to rest, so I lay down, heart still pounding from the stress, and tried to fall asleep. Needless to say, it was pretty difficult after what I had seen, but eventually, I fell asleep since it was quiet and peaceful again. Though my sleep didn't last long, I woke up before my next shift had even started to the sound of footsteps coming from outside the booth. I thought it must just be my friend carrying firewood from outside until I realized that he had fallen asleep in front of the guard desk. There was someone or something outside the booth that didn't belong there, someone that I feared I had seen earlier. I just lay there, heart pounding. I was not going to stand to see what was on the outside. This went on for a minute until I heard a sudden howl. At first, it sounded like the wind blowing through the cracks on the wall, but then I remembered there was no wind. This howl was long and high-pitched, almost like a moan. It made my whole body freeze from terror. I had never been this scared in my life. After the howl ended, the footsteps continued for a while until they faded too. Whatever had been on the outside was now finally gone, hopefully. Against all odds, I managed to fall back asleep and was awoken in the morning by my friend, whose next shift had started. I immediately remembered what happened the last night and told my friend. At first, he didn't believe me and laughed a little, but his expression grew serious once I showed him the picture I took. When we went outside, and I showed him the place where I had taken the photo, he was quiet. While we stood there, I took a second photo for comparison. My friend then walked to the spot where the creature had stood when I saw it. My friend was about 194 centimeters tall, and he came nowhere near close to the height of this thing, further proving to myself that I had not dreamt it at all. Sadly, I don't have a picture of my friend standing in the same spot. I didn't think of it at the time. After that, I brought this case to the attention of my superiors and other friends, and they were all as confused as I was. No one seemed to be able to explain what I had seen. Someone suggested that it could be a prank pulled by the other troops. I thought about it, but refused the possibility. There was no way some guys would bother walking many kilometers into the dead of night just to scare some random guardsmen. Besides, even if they did, why would they be standing south of the booth where it was forbidden for anyone to enter? If I wanted to scare the guardsmen, I would go to the north side of the booth, where I would be detected eventually for sure. But the fact that confirms that it couldn't have been some random troops playing a prank was the sheer size of it. Even two people standing on top of each other could hardly match the scale of this thing, let alone stay so still. And then there were the footsteps and the howl. To this day, I have no idea what I saw and heard that night. Was it some troop playing a prank, some abnormally huge civilian having a long night walk in the middle of nature, or something that science cannot explain? Before this event, I'd always been a bit of a skeptic when it came to the paranormal. I like to believe, but it's hard without any concrete evidence. But now that I had seen something myself and even got proof of it, I don't know what to believe anymore. So, to the Groupman Saka, whatever you may have been, I hope I someday find the truth about you. I've looked into this stuff, talking with my Native American friends, and I'm pretty sure a relative of mine had a nasty run-in with a skinwalker. Around here, Native Americans say these creatures often hang out at burial grounds and old graves, digging them up and disrespecting the sites. They supposedly take bits of brains and bodies, grinding them into a powder to use for curses. They're also known to scare people away from places like ancient burial sites or ruins. Now, before I dive into this, I need to tell you a few things. This story is secondhand, but the guy it happened to told it to me many times. I'm a natural skeptic, a bit of a cynic, so I can't say I believe it 100%. But he told it plain and clear, and his version never changed. I've known this dude for years, and his advice on pretty much everything is always thoughtful and super helpful, so I try to take his word for it, even if I'm a little wary. So let's get down to it. My buddy Marv sometimes goes off on his own to camp, just to get away and be one with nature. He's also a big gun guy, a real enthusiast. I can't remember exactly when he said this happened, but it was a few years back. He just decided to go camping on a whim. He packed his gear, specifically a hunting rifle and a .45 handgun, and headed out into the countryside onto a huge piece of land owned by one of his friends. He had all the necessary permissions, no problem. This happened near the Kisatchie National Forest, down in south-central Louisiana. He likes to hike in pretty deep and set up camp at some specific spots he'd found on previous trips. Those details aren't super important, not the main point of this encounter. So he got in there, set up his camp in his usual little clearing for the night. Fast forward a few hours. It was late afternoon when he started hearing leaves crunching and twigs snapping. He figured it was just an animal at first. He got up from cooking over the fire to try and get a peek. He looked towards the noise and saw a man walking through the trees, quite a ways off. Marv always told me his rule for dealing with other people way out in remote areas: always be cautious. More often than not, people out there are armed, just like him. He tries to be friendly, but he always keeps his guard up, looking for any hidden motives, because you just never know what some folks are up to in the middle of nowhere. He'll usually make small talk, try to figure out what they're doing if he can, and sometimes even share a meal. He'd never really met anyone bad before, except maybe this one situation, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, a couple things immediately set off his internal alarm bells. First, he knew he was the only one allowed to be on this property. Second, this guy was totally dressed wrong for the location. Marv said the guy was wearing a white t-shirt, blue jogging shorts, and white socks with sneakers. Now remember, Marv was miles deep in the woods, far from any paths, roads, houses, or anything like that. Nobody just casually strolls into a spot dressed like that unless they're lost or confused. It was early fall, not quite cold, pretty typical Louisiana weather, so there were tons of mosquitoes, ticks, and other bugs. You definitely wouldn't want to have most of your skin exposed if you could help it, especially deep in the woods. I know that from my own experiences too, believe me. So Marv figured something was probably off and called out, "Hey, do you need help with something?" He said it pretty loud, definitely loud enough to be heard. The guy, though, just kept walking, staring right at him. Marv was starting to get really unnerved. And like I said, I know this guy well, and he's usually as cool as a cucumber in tough spots. Getting more uneasy as the guy kept closing the distance, Marv got to his feet and loudly declared, "Hey man, can I help you with something, or what?" The guy was now only 10 to 15 feet away, standing right at the edge of the clearing in the forest. The guy looked Marv dead in the eye and clearly said, "Help me." Marv said he was actually getting pretty worried at this point because of how the guy said it. It was like something that didn't quite know how to talk was saying, "Help me," or at least that's what he first thought. It just didn't sound right. The guy, still standing perfectly still, said, "Help me," again, but this time it was more forceful and just really loud. Marv told me that's when he really picked up on what was truly messed up. He said the sound of his voice was actually more feminine and sounded exactly like a recording being played back. And the guy's lips and mouth weren't even moving in sync with the phrase. He was just opening his mouth, making the sound, and then closing it again. Marv asked, "What do you need help with?" Not daring to step back or move an inch. The guy, still motionless, just stared directly at him and said, "Help me," again, repeating the phrase another 3 times slowly, but not getting any louder. Marv, now totally clueless about what the hell was going on, interrupted the guy by barking, "All right, you need to go now unless you actually need my help. Do you need my help or not?" He kept his tone loud and firm. The guy didn't miss a beat and just started up with a "help me yes" again, and made a motion as if to take another step in Marv's direction. Marv told me that's when he did the only thing that made sense at that moment. He pulled out his .45 semi-automatic pistol and pointed it at the guy, telling him he needed to leave. The guy started getting more animated and agitated, actually beginning to say the phrase louder and louder, but still not stepping closer or backing away. Marv did what he thought was right given his situation, assuming he was dealing with someone unstable or potentially dangerous, and fired a shot into the ground right in front of the guy. Now, this is where it gets crazy, I swear to you. As the guy stopped saying the phrase, he went silent and just kept staring at Marv. Then he backflips and somersaults into the woods and immediately out of sight. Yes, you heard that right, just like an acrobat. I know what you're thinking because I had the same reaction. This sounds completely made up for sure. But Marv gave no hint that he was lying and told me this multiple times, each time with a dead serious expression. Yet Marv said the guy backflipped away effortlessly, like he was yanked by some invisible spring. He described it as totally unnatural for a human and completely out of place. The guy had just appeared, repeated the same phrase over and over, eventually getting almost frantic before Marv shot at the ground, which made him flee in the weirdest way possible. Marv said he stood there, his eyes glued to the forest where the guy had just flipped into, and heard no more movement. It was like the guy had never even been there. Marv stayed like that as the sun started to set and the usual night sounds began to creep in. As I mentioned before, Marv is a pretty unshakable guy, and he actually stayed in that area for the night and the following night with no further incidents before heading home. When he told me and some other friends about this, of course, we had a ton of questions. We pressed him to describe the guy's voice more. He said the more he thought about it after it happened, the more certain he was that it was definitely a female's voice coming from the guy. It was almost like he or it had heard someone say it and mimicked it like a parrot or any other talking bird would, almost like a lure. He still doesn't know what it wanted, and it didn't give any other signs or say anything else. It reacted instantly to the gunshot, and well, you know what happened next. He's been back to that property since, with no other strange things happening. The only other small detail I can recall is that he did remember hearing what sounded like a gunshot off in the distance during the early morning of the first night, and it sounded eerily similar to his .45. He thought he might have heard it again on the hike back. There are hunters in the area, of course, so it could have just been that, he couldn't be sure. Since this incident, and another one he had in a completely different spot, he did some online digging about the entire Kisatchie area. He found many legends, stories, and alleged encounters involving skinwalkers and other creepy bits of Native American folklore in the region, not to mention mimics and other similar supposed creatures. A lot of his encounters seem to line up with these tales, but there's nothing concrete to prove it. Still, even for a skeptic like me, it makes you wonder about the strange things in the remote and untouched corners of the world that just can't be explained. My buddy Devin and I had this wild experience about 5 years back. I'd rather not say exactly where it went down, just to keep things private. See, Devin and I have been tight since we were little kids. I even remember my mom, my friends, and me all hanging out at the park, snapping photos when we were younger. He was practically a second son to my mother. We grew up doing all the usual kid stuff, playing video games, pigging out on junk food, staying up late, climbing out windows, sneaking into each other's places, all those silly teenage antics. We had our squabbles, made up, and built a really long history of friendship. He was truly my best friend. We spent all our childhood and teen years together. Eventually, we got into relationships, and our lives, wives, and priorities pulled us in different directions, causing us to slowly drift apart. We were both around 35 when this event happened. His wife, Emma, and my wife, Jane, were planning to do their own thing with the kids, so it was set to be a guy's weekend, a hunting trip for just me and my brother. It was late in the evening, and we had already set up our camp, now busy making plans for where we'd head next. We knew the area pretty well from previous hunts, and were really looking forward to what tomorrow might bring, hoping to snag something good. Our last hunting trip, you see, had been a bust. We came home with nothing. That just made us even more determined to get a decent catch this time. As we were hashing out our plans, we suddenly picked up on a weird sound in the distance, kind of like a hum, a really low one, almost magnetic, if you know what I mean. We both stopped talking at the same time and looked up at the sky, trying to figure out where the noise was coming from. But there was nothing there except a blanket of stars and our little campfire light illuminating our small spot. We listened closely. The sound was still there, definitely real, but we just couldn't pinpoint its exact source. It was starting to bother us a bit. We kept on with our planning. By the time we were done, the hum was still there, seriously bugging us. We figured the smartest thing to do was probably just hit the hay. Maybe we were just imagining things, or it was just some strange animal sound we hadn't heard before. Animals do make some pretty odd noises, we thought. So we both crawled into our own tents and crashed. But something kept nagging at me. A few hours later, the sound was different. It was much stronger now, and I could have sworn I saw bright lights flashing right over my tent. I honestly thought Devin was screwing with me. So in my half-asleep state, I unzipped my tent and peeked outside. Lights were definitely coming from above, and I could make out some kind of object just hovering there. It was absolutely the source of this bizarre noise, which was louder than ever before. All I really remember after that is blacking out and then waking up in the morning, way past when my alarm should have gone off, and it didn't even make a sound. I was totally disoriented. I slowly got up off the ground and looked around. Our campfire was long dead. Then I glanced over at Devin's tent. He wasn't in there. I poked around, yelling his name, but no answer anywhere. I started getting pretty scared. Had he gone off hunting without me? I checked his tent one more time and found all his gear stashed under his sleeping bag, which was completely empty. I unzipped the sleeping bag all the way, and yup, it was totally empty. He was nowhere to be found. I tried to push my fear aside, figuring he'd just gone to pee or something, so I yelled his name into the wilderness, but still nothing. This was really unsettling. I just sat there for what felt like ages, and he never came back. At this point, I was absolutely terrified that my friend had died out there. So I sent him a text and packed up to leave, then started making my way out of camp. I went through all the proper steps for a search and rescue, trying to get him found because I was really worried about my friend. Here's where things got really messed up. When I called my wife and told her Devin was gone, she had no idea who I was talking about. I told her, "He's my best friend. This isn't funny, especially with him missing." I left out all the stuff about the lights and noise from the night before, obviously. She actually started getting mad at me, saying I was just wasting her time and making a big deal out of nothing, and that I sounded drunk or high and needed to come home. I was beyond furious. What in the hell was happening? I quickly scrolled through my phone and found Devin's wife's number, gave her a call, but she didn't pick up. I sent her a text, asking if she heard from him, and a few hours later, I got a reply. Who is this? I mean, what in God's name was going on? Long story short, they never found his body. They never found a single thing. When I finally got home, everyone I talked to acted like I was completely losing it. I quickly learned to just drop the subject. I still have absolutely no clue what's going on. It's like that night, he was completely wiped from existence. Every single trace of him, his wife, who apparently we don't even talk to or know, his family, who I'd never met, my own mom didn't even know who he was. And all the photos of him and me together as kids, I can't find them anywhere. Not on my computer, not in old albums. He just doesn't exist anymore, and I'm the only one who remembers him. Am I going crazy? Some folks think I just fell and hit my head on a rock, and that's why I woke up feeling weird and imagined this whole thing. But that can't be real, can it? Devin, buddy, if you're out there, please send me some kind of sign. I honestly feel like I'm losing my mind.